Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast. That's Phil Perry right there. We're going to talk plenty of Patriots. For those of you digesting our on-television product or the linear product, you'll see Scott Pioli coming up in a few. It was a terrific conversation with the Patriots' former exec. And Phil and I are going to talk a little bit about Pioli, a little bit about the Patriots coaching situation as the season closes down. But we're also going to talk Bills, Phil. Patriots are going to play the Bills. And here's what Jerod Mayo had to say about Josh Allen on Wednesday and what the Patriots have to watch out for with probably the MVP in 2024.
Well, first, I don't know how much he weighs, but I mean, this is a big human being here. So anytime a guy who, there are rules around obviously tackling quarterbacks, but he also can run you over, run around you, and also still maintain being a passer as he gets outside the pocket. And those are just the challenges that he puts on defenses.
Do you think Josh Allen's the best quarterback in the league and the MVP?
I do. He is just so ridiculously physically gifted, Tom, and his ability to create plays when there are seemingly no plays there to create is so next level. And his intelligence now, it feels like, is caught up to his physical skill set, and it just makes him so dangerous in just about every situation. You can have him perfectly played, and he can still figure out a way to create an explosive play on you.
With feet, with quickness, with strength, with the arm, with touch now, and he actually has figured out when to fold his tent and say, you know what, this really isn't working. Why don't I throw this at the tuba player? Do you have a wish list for Sunday? Of course, the Patriots, we talked about over and over again, the final 4 games being so critical. They could serve as a springboard. They could serve as an evaluation period. Instead, they peed down their leg quite a bit on Sunday at Arizona. Now they're going up against 2 opponents in 3 weeks, which are extremely difficult to deal with and have things at stake. If you're the Patriots, what's your wish list? I'm going to give you 3 for me. No penalties or 2 for 10 yards. Okay? 2 for 10 yards. Set out for one of those games. No more, I'm new here. Doesn't matter if it's the head coach. Doesn't matter if it's Jalen Polk. No more, I'm new here. Act like after 15 weeks, you're pretty sure what you're supposed to be doing. Finally, keep it a 1-score game throughout. At no point should you be saying, oh, they're down 2 scores, they're cooked, and trying to extract a 31-21 loss. Those are my 3.
That last one is going to be really hard for them to execute. I think it might just be damn near impossible, but
I built up to it.
'Tis the season, It's a time for magic and enchantment, and maybe they could do something along those lines when they go up to Buffalo. For me, my wish list would start on the defensive side, and you're not going to be able to eliminate all explosive plays, Tom. What I would say is eliminate the explosive runs. You can't have runs like they had the other day, 53 yards on the first play of their second drive. It's just totally deflating. And you had it bottled up from an X's and O's standpoint, and you just couldn't execute because your 2 safeties aren't at their best right now, Jabril Peppers and Kyle Duggar. You have to make sure you're managing all of these guys to make sure you're limiting the explosive plays from a run game standpoint. That would be near the top of the list for me. Josh Allen's going to get his. But if they're going off on the ground, too, and they're picking up 15 yards, 18 yards, 35 yards with run plays, you can't have it.
What's irritating and mystifying is that they are talented on defense. Keon White, Christian Barmore, Anthony Jennings we've seen play well. Jelani Tavai we saw play well last year. I thought he was an outstanding player for them. Duggar, Peppers, Gonzalez. That's 7 friggin' guys who I've mentioned on their defense who we've seen play well at different junctures. That's why I have a tendency to defensively look at it and go, well, they're better than that. They'll be able to fix it. But what if this is what they are and guys have crested, or the coaching is such that these guys now are in, because I feel this to be the case, these guys are not in do your job mode. They're in make a play mode, which is death, I think, in a defense that doesn't have any one dynamic player who can make up for somebody else's mistake.
I agree with that, and I think they still might be, Tom, on certain weeks and in certain occasions, trying to do too much. It doesn't feel like...
With the plan or with the individuals?
With the plan. I just feel like as much as big picture, we're still waiting for this team to establish an identity and say, this is who we are, this is who we're going to be week after week after week. You can bank on seeing this from us. They haven't done that specifically on the defensive side either. And that, to me, has to be frustrating because they should be better. You're mentioning all the talent that they have. And I think they went into this year thinking that they would be what they've always been on that side of the ball, which is a game plan defense. And we'll be able to do a little bit of everything. And we'll run zone one play and man the next, and we'll blitz some weeks and we won't blitz other weeks, and we'll just have opposing quarterbacks' heads spinning. And they just clearly can't do that for whatever reason right now, whether it's missing Jawan Bentley, Peppers and Duggar not being themselves, different changes and guys slotting in. Jelani Tavai, he's out there, but now he's in a little different spot because Jawan Bentley's missing. Or if it's just the coaching. You've got these guys that are in different roles, obviously, with DeMarcus Covington and Jerod Mayo. So I think they need to zero in on what they truly want to be, especially in a week like this against Josh Allen.
It's really funny because when you think about it, I left out Dietrich Wise and Jonathan Jones and didn't mention Bentley. That gets us to 11. I mentioned 11 players who are capable NFL players that I've seen. I didn't even mention Marcus Jones. He could play.
These are all starting caliber NFL players.
They could play, whereas on offense, Hunter Henry might start elsewhere, and Mike Onwenu might start elsewhere, and of course Drake May would. I don't know how many teams Demario Douglas would be the first receiver on, second receiver, or third receiver. He's the number one here. So that's a fleet of players on the defensive side. That's why sometimes when I look at this team, we pin the needle left and right all the time. But I looked at Sunday's game and said it wasn't that bad. That's why it was so maddening to see them lose. It was hamstrung first by Vidarian Lowe, then by Layden Robinson, then by Ben Brown, then by Jabril Peppers. So it's one guy going, oh, is it me to screw this up? Because I can do that. I know we're making progress. And then that would happen. Or Keyshawn Boutte in the second half. Or the call on Jennings. Came down to like 5 or 6 plays. It wasn't total system failure. Am I naive? Am I, looking at a cloudy sky and saying, oh, it looks brightening?
Well, I think you're doing what all reasonable people would do, which is, it can't all be bad, can it? Possibly. And you're right. It is just a handful of plays. But when you have that many critical plays that go in the wrong direction for you, that's what leads to a multi-score deficit in a game that really feels like it's out of control. And that's why I like your second point, which is have it be a 2 penalties for 10-yard kind of day. Or, if you can knock it down even further from there, great. But I would say even, and this would make it to my wish list, especially in plus 50 situations. So when you're at least starting to threaten to score, it doesn't have to be in the red zone, but certainly in the red zone. Don't have that one mistake that just blows it up for everybody. And I'm looking at you, offensive line. Let's just call for what it is. Kendrick Bourne's had some bad penalties. Jalen Polk's had some bad penalties. But this past week it was the line, and most weeks it's the line. And so we know you're not very good. And we know you're banged up in spots, and we know you're just dealing from a deficit when it comes to talent. But you can't be the reason that you're actually moving backward and away from the goal line and away from points, especially in a game like this.
And that's the funny thing is we can sit here and say, well, Vidarian Lowe's not very good. He's physically overmatched. But the mistakes he was making last week on the edge and those running plays and also in the passing game when he allowed the sack, that wasn't a physical thing. When the snap is, start playing football at the snap. So I do want to get back to one thing from Sunday again to circle up once again on the – you said it, I didn't, and Drake May talking about, hey, I can run, I'm a big dude. I was a good sneaker in college. I still don't understand how the message could have escaped Alex Van Pelt. If Mayo feels that strongly, where it seems as if it's something that, if he's going to answer it that way, it seems as if, hey, you're preaching to the choir. It really feels that way. And if May feels that way, is the communication so bad that no one is adamantly or definitively saying we're gonna need to run the ball in those situations this week?
It might be.
What a failure, though.
Well, so I asked Jerod Mayo today about the word collaboration and how you, as the head coach, can still assert your will on the game plan as the guy who's in charge and as the boss. And he said, well, look, collaboration means you're just going to listen. It doesn't mean that everybody gets a say or everybody gets a vote. It just means we're going to hear each other out. But it does feel like Alex Van Pelt has been against running Drake May because he wants to make sure he remains healthy, which is noble. But he's their best player. And he would be, I think, a game-changing runner in a designed quarterback run sort of situation, not even just a quarterback sneak situation in a third or a fourth and short. And so I think he is just reluctant to do it And I think he's only wanting to do it, or even telling us that he wants to do it, in gotta-have-it situations, true game-deciding types of situations. And I think in the third quarter, with plenty of time still left on the clock and the game's still somewhat in the balance, he says, no, I'm not doing it here. It's just not one of those spots. We talked about it. It has to be the right situation, right, Jerod? And he didn't see it as that kind of situation, and maybe Jerod does, because there are clearly gotta-have-it situations. Gotta-have-it situations probably in the first quarter that impact how the game is going to go and the ultimate outcome. And so that, to me, is probably the disconnect. They probably have talked about it. They are certainly in the game plan. They have been for weeks. I've been asking about it for weeks. It's in the game plan. These quarterback runs, they're practicing these. I think there's just a disconnect on when to use them.
And that's the funny thing where I would, first of all, if you are deferring and you're just saying, hey, we need to run it, and Van Pelt to say, we will. When the time's right, I promise you we're going to do it. Then you have to, on 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1, right before that 4th and 1 play when you had to burn a timeout, say, this is the time. Even if you don't have it called, I'm going to own it. I'll say that I did it. It works, doesn't work. If it works, I won't say I did it. If it doesn't work, I'll say I did it. So,
is this the disadvantage to having a quote-unquote head coach offense? Because Jerod Mayo referred to Alex Van Pelt again in that fashion this week when he did his weekly interview with WEEI. Is there too much deferring from the head coach, in your opinion?
Yeah, in practice, yes. In theory, no. In theory, it makes sense. But that's what happens when you hire guys who don't know each other prior to coaching together. Again, Bill knew Charlie Weiss, Bill knew Romeo Crennel. We can go around and around and use all the examples around the league where guys know and are familiar with the people, and they share a brain prior to it so they know what's going to happen. Like if Jerod says, maybe you'd like to see some more of that. If Bill said that, Charlie Weiss would say, well, I sure as shit better run those because Bill will be all over me if I don't. Fascinating. Speaking of which, we're talking about collaboration and a management of who's in charge here. And I spoke to Scott Pioli this week, and in speaking to Scott Pioli and also putting it out there, how could the Patriots improve? Our old friend Mike McCann tweeted back to a Quick Slants poll and said, basically, the Patriots could use a football overlord. Everybody's a first-year GM, head coach, coordinator. They're all getting to know each other in the first place. You don't have any old sage on whom you have an individual making the decisions. You blew everybody out last year without a full vetting of the candidates and just said, we're going to move these guys up. So now the Crafts, who have professed that they are not football meddlers, but managers of their managers, taking notes. A football overlord would remedy that situation in which he's the one taking notes. Here's Scott Pioli, though. I'm going to let this fly because Phil and I have a disagreement on this. Here's Scott Pioli talking about the opportunity to, talking about what a team needs to do at the end of a season. It's brought to you by Shaw's Perfecting the Art of Fresh.
That ultimately, there's usually one final say, but there's usually a very small group of people within the leadership group that help make the decisions. And the responsibility of that group, again, in these meetings and at the end of the season, is to sit down and say, okay, this is where we improved. This is where we need to continue to improve. This is what we did well. This is what we didn't do well. And this is what we didn't do well and why we didn't do well. So those conversations have to happen. I think as you move forward here, you have to understand, okay, we now have an understanding throughout the organization, culturally, what we're looking for, what our coaching staff is looking for. Because a big part of what we did, yes, we had some good players we inherited, but then we developed some other players. And the player development component was huge. So right now, I think what needs, Parcells said a long time ago, and he used to say this to players, at the end of a season, don't ever make a decision about your future immediately after the game. Because no one is happy except for one team at the end of a season. And you need to let things settle, let some of the emotion exit, and then go back to all the points that you kept in the season when you were pissed off or you were unhappy, and then assess, how does the leadership group plan to change or do something better and or different, and have a plan. Don't just say we're going to do this. Well, what's the plan to get better at this specific item?
So in addition to the notion of a football overlord, I look at Scott Pioli, he just articulated everything. He is solid enough, and I think, not cutthroat, but experienced enough to understand it's a business. And if he has to come in, doesn't matter if he knows Elliott Wolf, doesn't matter if he knows Jerod Mayo, doesn't matter which assistants he knows, it doesn't matter if it's ownership. I think that he is emboldened enough as a guy, having known him, to say, you guys need to stop yelling at these guys down here, and you guys got to fix this draft. And you have no plan, Mr. Assistant Coach. Sorry, it's been great, I'm sure, but we're going to replace you. That's why I think it's good. And you don't love that idea.
Well, here's what I would say. I don't hate the idea.
Now that I've presented it differently?
Well, it's been presented in a tremendous way by you. And Scott Pioli articulating it the way he articulates it makes a lot of sense. To me, there are two issues at play. Number one would be, does the football overlord have final say on things like the draft, on things like game planning? Can he march into any office, say, this is how it's going to be, and that's how it's going to be?
Oh, I guess that he would have like a driver's ed teacher. If Elliott Wolf is about to take a safety at number 3, he's got the brake in front of him to say, we're not doing that. We're not doing that. Okay.
So yes. So he would in some ways have final say.
Yeah, but he's not going to sit there and say, Elliott, you got to ask him this on the trade call.
Well, so that's a delicate thing. It would
sure
be my
is.
point, right? So if you're telling me that he can stop a disaster from happening, but he also can't whisper to him, on a Wednesday when they're getting ready for the Bills, I don't love that blitz that we have in here. Just FYI, I've seen Josh Allen kill that blitz. Don't put that blitz in
But
the
I would
game
rather
plan.
have him doing it than ownership, if ownership is indeed doing it.
My follow-up to that would be, if he does have final say.
This overlord, not
This
Scott.
overlord. Right. If he does have final say, if I'm ownership, why am I paying all this money to the guys directly beneath him? If it's a Scott Pioli type, why am I paying Elliott Wolf? Because he's the general manager. If it's a Bill Parcells type, why am I paying Jerod Mayo? Bill Parcells is essentially telling the head coach how to head coach. What's the point of having the guy who's actually on the sidelines being the head coach? Why isn't it Parcells down there, or fill in the blank?
Well, Bill did it in Miami, Parcells. And if you don't have an Andy Reid, or how many are there? Others are there? McVay kind of, but no, he's got Les Snead. If you don't have Bill Belichick or Andy Reid or somebody who you can say, this guy knows every nook, cranny, and secret of being here, and operating all levels of a team, then you should consider somebody who might. And people might say, well, we had that in Bill. Well, Bill had too much on his friggin' plate because he was trying to run every single thing in terms of coaching, offensive line, personnel, direct, college scouting, draft. I mean, you can't do all of it, and you can defer as much as you say you are and collaborate as much as you want to say. But Bill was not necessarily a football overlord the same way that an experienced guy like Pioli might have been when they started, he and Bill, in 2001.
If you want
2000.
that kind of presence in your building, then I would say you might be best served just moving on from the people who don't have experience. Because you either hire the people who don't have experience in the jobs that they have right now, Jerod Mayo, Elliott Wolf, and say they're going to grow into the job and they are going to learn every nook and cranny eventually of their side of the building and they're going to get better. Or you're just looking for someone more experienced who can come in right away. In hiring these guys, you have eschewed the opportunity to bring in somebody like you're describing right now. And you've done it for a reason. And so I think if you go back on that decision in some ways, which is what this would be doing, and saying you actually need your hand held in this situation, and that situation, the situation after that. And so we're going to pay this guy a lot of money, and you better listen to him. I'm not really sure why you hired the other guys.
Because that is,
and why you don't just move on from them.
Because it isn't going back on your decision necessarily, as it's saying we took a year to evaluate and see what we needed and what we don't need going forward. And clearly we asked too much of these individuals in too many different ways. We need a buffer because we can't be sitting here meddling in different things if we disagree with it, or if we do. And again, I do believe that the Crafts make very clear when they are unhappy, dissatisfied, or agreeing with the fan base. I do not believe that they get involved in X's and O's the way we pretend to on these podcasts or in personnel when they say draft this guy or draft that guy. I don't think that they do that. I think Drake May was an obvious choice. Kraft wanted it, but that's okay because everybody else did too. Great. But they need a layer to separate them, I think, from the coaching staff. I think fans right now are alienated from this team. I think the fan base is alienated. I think the media, to a large extent, even the people who look at the people and understand a little bit, not that fans don't, but we understand the landscape and can be a little less emotional. Well, this led to this, led to this, led to this, led to, well, what we're looking at right now. You can follow the breadcrumbs. But I think people are alienated to a point where you can either, if you're the Crafts, say, we effed up, we got to start again, or say, we know it's going poorly, here's what's lacking, we're going to put this in. That's where I think this offseason should go.
I agree with that. My question would be, how badly do you want to handcuff the people that you've originally hired? And if it's significant, if it's so significant that you need to bring in someone who would essentially have final say on really important decisions, should you maybe not just move on from them altogether? Now, that being said,
handcuff or handhold?
it depends on how it goes,
Neither
I
one
guess.
you're looking for.
No, you're not looking for either one. And here's what I would say, just to kind of maybe have our takes meet halfway. If it's a short-term engagement and everyone knows that going in, so your hand can be held for a year or maybe 2 as you learn, that would be one thing. If it's just this indefinite, this is your boss outside of me as your owner or as the team's owner, I don't love that situation because I think you're setting up a power dynamic that we haven't seen operate all that often, nor all that successfully. The Parcells example that you mentioned, I don't really, quite frankly, I don't remember how that played out. I can't think of many teams that operate that way.
Albert did a good job yesterday on Early Edition mentioning that you're talking to Tom Coughlin in Jacksonville, you're talking Parcells, and you're talking Mike Holmgren, where it didn't really work out.
All 3 of those spots, it didn't work out.
All 3 of those guys were old, and it kind of worked out with Coughlin because he got Jacksonville to the point where they actually went to the AFC Championship game and probably should have been in the Super Bowl if they didn't have Brady and Amendola. Believe it or not, they almost lost to Blake Mother-Scratching Bortles.
Was that a good team?
24-14. What was that guy? Miles Jack.
Blake Bortles led football team.
Was that Miles Jack?
Yeah, Miles Jack had a penalty that turned the tide in that game.
Yeah.
Or not a penalty, but a fumble.
recovery.
Yeah, fumble recovery that was not.
Yeah. I mean, that was 2018. That should have been.
Was the winner of 2018, yeah, 2017
Rams,
season.
Jaguars Super Bowl.
No, that would have been, I believe that was the Philly Super Bowl year.
Is that right?
Yeah, because Edelman was out. That was Danny Amendola was going off every.
Kansas City game.
Yeah, Danny Amendola was going off on a weekly basis without Edelman that year.
And Gronk got hurt in the early portion of that game.
Yes, he did.
And then, yeah. All right, good deal. Phil, we got more Scott Pioli for our viewers at home. We also have a game coming up Sunday against the Buffalo Bills. You will be there. It's a 4:25 game. Make sure you listen to pregame live. That'll be on at noon. We'll have postgame live right after the game. You got an Expats this week?
We do. Keep an eye out.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us, and enjoy your weekend. Happy holidays.